A lot has been made about UF's schedule. Obviously, it is the toughest schedule in college football, and it's also the toughest UF schedule that I can remember UF ever having, which is kind of saying something because UF plays a difficult schedule year in and year out. Something that intrigues me about the schedule, though, is which game is the most important game? Most important for the program, most important for Coach Napier, and most important for the fan base. Paul Finebaum actually made some comments on this recently, and then I read an article from Nick DeLaTorre of Gators Online, and it gave me something to think about. So I'm going to play the clip from Finebaum, but before I give you his argument or talk about Nick's and then give you mine, what game do you think is the most important on UF's 2024 schedule? All right, check this clip out.
But their season really lies with that first game. For all the important games that we will talk about for the next 2.5 months, it's probably the Florida-Miami game in Gainesville is probably the most important game of the year, I think, because if they can win that game, they're going to get some momentum. If they lose, they may have a more difficult time digging themselves out. But their season really lies with that first game.
Okay, so Finebaum thinks that either the season gets off to the right start with a win over Miami, or it's going to be pretty hard to pull out of losing if they lose to Miami. Nick DeLaTorre had a different take. He says that he thinks that Tennessee, Kentucky, Georgia, and LSU, that all of those games are bigger than the Miami game, for different reasons. But chiefly because it seems that the SEC games, a losing streak against Kentucky, Tennessee being on the road, Napier needing a signature road win, etc., that all of those factors make a slew of SEC games more important than the Miami game. So here's my take. Guys, I got to side with Finebaum on this one. Miami's game is important for several reasons. First of all, it sets the tone for the year. Remember when Florida beat Utah 2 years ago? We thought we were going to be unstoppable, right? The amount of momentum that came out of that game was huge. The stadium was rocking. The fan base was pumped. Everybody was 100% behind Coach Napier and this team because they set out on the right foot. Wins are also going to be harder to come by the further along we get in the season. So if you look at Florida's schedule in two halves, the first 6 games, the last 6 games, the first 6 games are much easier on paper than the last 6 games. You need to start out the gate strong because if you don't, it becomes harder to find wins as you go down the road. Another factor that I think is really important is that Mario Cristobal is in the same boat as Coach Napier right now. Both of them are headed into year 3. Both of them are considered elite recruiters. Both of them don't have as many wins as the fan base had hoped when they were hired. We compete for similar recruits, right? Florida beats Miami. They get to go back to all those South Florida kids that they want and say, listen, we went together head to head and we came out victorious. Why in the world would you pick the third-year coach who can't beat his uptown or upstate rival? You don't, right? You don't pick that program anymore. But the reverse is an argument for Mario Cristobal. If Miami beats Florida, you say, look, we are on the right path. We went to Gainesville. We beat the big bad Gators. Why would you want to play for the program that we beat? This game sets the tone for the 2024 season. Now, Nick talked about SEC opponents, and I do think in general that your record against the SEC matters more than your record against out-of-conference opponents. It just does. It just means more. right? I think you are more likely to get fired for losing against SEC rivals than for your overall record. Now, Florida goes to Tennessee. Coach Napier needs that signature road win. They've gotten the Tennessee monkey off their back, right? They beat Tennessee in Gainesville last season. So I don't think it's important from that aspect. Napier's proven that he can beat the Volunteers. But I do think a signature road win needs to happen, and it would be a big one to win in Neyland Stadium. Now, you look at Georgia and LSU. These games are big games because they are rivals. Florida, Georgia is monumental for Gator fans and Bulldogs, right? Winning that would be great. LSU is absolutely a rival of Florida's. Such a fun game, so intense. But I don't think that anybody expects Florida to win either of those games. So I just don't think that there's a lot of pressure there. Now, do we want to win them? Absolutely. I hope we win them. But I don't think that there's anybody that looks at those two games and thinks, oh man, if we can't beat Georgia or we can't beat LSU, we're not on the right track. I don't think that at all. I think if you can be competitive against Georgia and you can be competitive against LSU, you are absolutely on the right track. So I don't think those games count as any of the most important of this season. We're not expected to win. If we do, awesome. If we don't, nobody's head's on a chopping block. So what is the most important SEC game then? I think it's got to be Kentucky. And I think it's really, really close whether Miami or Kentucky is the single most important game of the season. Miami is really important because we go head to head with them for recruits on a regular basis and because that game sets the tone for the 2024 season. But Florida has lost the last 3 years to Kentucky. They've lost 4 of the last 6. Prior to that, from 1987 to 2018, 31 games. Florida was Kentucky's daddy. This is the game that hurts Gator fans the most because it's the one for 3 decades we could count on winning no matter what. So if Florida can't get back onto that streak, I don't think it's great for Coach Napier. I think Florida has to beat Kentucky. I don't consider Kentucky a rival because for my entire life, essentially, Florida has beaten them. Even years when they weren't supposed to, Kentucky couldn't get the Florida monkey off their back. Now roles have reversed. Florida has not been able to put together a complete game against Kentucky in at least 3 years. They haven't been able to do it consistently in 6. That is a huge problem, and a problem that spans longer than Coach Napier's tenure. It goes back into the Mullen era. But this is one of those games that Florida has got to get back in the driver's seat of. It is very important, and if it's not the most important game of the season, it's certainly a bellwether game for the entire Napier tenure. All right, so there you have it. I think the Miami game is the most important game of the season. I think the Kentucky game is the bellwether game of the season. So I understand the arguments for all the other games for sure, but you're just not convincing me that any of those are the most important game of the 2024 season for the Gators. But just because you can't convince me doesn't mean you shouldn't try. Hit the comments and let's talk about it. I appreciate you guys for tuning in. And as always, go Gators.